This podcast contains spoilers, so listen at your own risk or call back after you've watched the movie.
You know who you call. Leave a message. Maybe they'll call you back. Then again, maybe they won't.
We're having ourselves quite a little game of phone tag here.
Ring, ring, ring. I usually get this guy's answering machine.
I'll call you right back.
If you're there, please pick up the phone. I really want to talk to you.
I check my fucking messages every day when I come home from work. My answering machine, zero. I got a blinking light.
All I have to do is pick up this phone right here, inform the cinema, and your plan's kaput.
No, I ain't got no phone. I had to pull, because people calling all the time, and who needs the aggravation, right? Interruptions.
Hey man, just walking the streets of Madrid right now, visiting the in-laws here. Yesterday morning, I woke up to the Oscars having been broadcast. Obviously, we're in Europe, so we don't really get to see the Oscars live. I remember one time I was actually in, I think I was in Nicaragua, and I was like in this scenario where I had to catch a really, really long bus journey that would go across like 4 different countries. It's just a cheap way of getting to, I think, Mexico or maybe Guatemala, I can't remember. And to catch this bus, I had to go to just like a nowhere place. These places where it's just like, it's not even a town. There's just like, it was just like a hotel at an intersection kind of thing. Like, no, I don't think you can even book it online or something. It was like really like hope and a prayer type thing. And I checked into this hotel. It's like dingy little room which had millions of TV channels, and I noticed it was Oscar night, and it was because I was in that part of the world. I was in the Americas. It kind of lined up perfectly, and I was like, oh, I thought I was just going to be completely at a loss here in this random little spot, but I can watch the Oscars. And that's the only time I think I've been in a time zone that was agreeable to watching the Oscars. But usually it's a case of like wake up in the morning and it's happened. And I don't care about, I used to care when I was a kid. I used to be like, oh, I want this film to win. Over the years, I think just enough films like Coda winning Best Picture and stuff like that, it's just made me go, okay, what this awards ceremony is doing is something so far off my barometer of what I could care about. Like, for starters, I don't care about awarding art in that, like making art into a competition and saying this art was better than that art and all that. I just generally don't agree with that anyway. So I look at, like, when people say this is the best thing, I interpret that as like, oh, that's a recommendation. Let me check that out. So when something wins the Palme d'Or, or some critic I respect put something high up on their like end of year lists, I'm obviously not looking at that as like, that's the best one. I'm looking at it like, oh, cool, let me check that out. That is interesting. But because the type of films the Oscars or the Academy Awards over anything are a bit removed from my tastes anyway, it doesn't even serve that purpose to me. So like, I'm not a big Oscars guy, but I'm on holidays and kind of spending a lot of time just sort of looking after the kids, and my wife's a bit under the weather as well. So even though we got like a good bit of support here with in-laws and stuff, still I'm a bit finding myself like sort of like in the house, not really doing much quite a bit of the time. And just checking what street I'm going. I'm on a bit of a wild goose chase here, trying to find a bar I noticed on Google Maps. But anyways, yeah, I just found myself going, you know what, I'm going to watch a whole bunch of the Oscars. I'm going to watch a whole bunch of this broadcast. As you know, it's 3 hours or something like that. So threw it on and working my way through it. And there's always, every year, there's a couple of wins where I go, you know what, I don't care about the Oscars in terms of like them validating my opinion or whatever. but I do like to see awards given to people I like that kind of go against the grain of what the Oscars normally does. Obviously, the Oscars is normally there to like give legacy awards. You've done a whole good career, or you've been like a big glamorous star for ages, and now you did something more closer to like actual real acting. So you were the best ever. And sometimes you see something where it's like, oh, this person actually isn't a big name, or this person isn't like part of the family for decades or whatever. And you go, yeah, it's nice they got an Oscar because that's going to boost their career. Divine Joy Randolph last year was an example of that. This year, I think Micah Manson winning over Demi Moore, who'd be more of the kind of industry pick. You know, things like that. They're kind of go, oh, well, this is it's a boon for that person. Sean Baker this year, you know, whatever. He's always been very resourceful, getting projects together, funded and all that, and doing everything within a decent, like, cheap budget, so he can kind of do whatever he wants. I'm sure he's been batting away MCU and Disney live action remake offers for the past 5 years, but you know, he's held true to his creative vision, and now he'll be even more free to make whatever projects he wants. I'm sure he won't struggle at all to get funding for his next film. So anyway, it's those little nice positive stories where you go, these people did good work, and now this is going to be a big bonus for their career. And probably the nicest little success story of the night for me was this tiny little low budget animated film, Flow, picking up Best Animated Feature. It's made on Blender, which is a free 3D modeling software I've used myself a little bit. It's kind of the go-to for independent people, amateur people, you know, just people outside of the industry. And it was made in Latvia. It's a Latvian independent film. I don't know a huge amount about the origin of the story, but like at the very least, it's not come from Pixar. It's not come from, you know, Illumination or one of these giant entities. So I was quite, have had it on my radar for at least a year, maybe multiple years now, because animated films have a really slow rollout from their initial appearance at a film festival. Independent animated films, that is. They're kind of like something that if you're plugged into the animation scene, you're aware of from like Earth. You know, it takes so long to make an animated film that they're kind of showing their work from the point they first release any kind of like, here's some little tests, some little technical tests, and just some, you know, a little bit of sizzle reel or whatever, to when you, as just a regular person not going to film festivals and stuff, actually get to see it. It's often like 6-7 years or something. So I've been conscious of this film for a while. Never really liked the look of it whenever I sort of saw clips and stuff, but you know, in more recent months, it's got a lot of acclaim. And then seeing it pick up the Oscar, that sort of piqued my interest. And I'd been wanting to go to the cinema while I was here, but they don't really do matinees in Spain much, so kind of meant that I couldn't go really, because in the evenings I'm like on bedtime duty for the kids. So this is one film that was available to me at a daytime showing. So I woke up, asked my daughter, do you want to go to the cinema? She said, yeah. She got very excited. And my mother-in-law and my daughter and we went along to see it, little local cinema, which is very nice. I'd taken her to the cinema once before, recently, a couple of months ago, to see Moana 2. She loves Moana, but the intensity of the cinema with the darkness and the loudness and everything meant we only got about 40 minutes through that movie, and then she asked to go home. Now, she did ask to leave a couple of times when we were watching Flow, because it is a bit intense for a 3-year-old, you know, like, I don't mean the movie is a bit intense anyway, but mainly just the darkness and loudness of a cinema is a pretty intense experience if you've got absolutely no experience with that kind of thing. But I had a bunch of chocolates, and every time I was like, do you want a chocolate? And then we'll go in. Well, she's like, yeah. So she was like kind of in two minds. When I take her to the toilet, she'd be like talking excitedly about the movie. So she got through it. And by the end of it, she was happy that she had seen it. So it's actually the first movie she's seen in the cinema for real, because Moana 2, she only saw 40 minutes of. We've since watched it a few times at home, but this is her first like full watching a movie in the cinema. I'd kind of wanted to save that for like something that would become really iconic. Like my first movie in the cinema was Who Framed Roger Rabbit, and that's still to this day a pretty famous movie, pretty revered and known about film. Whereas Flow, I think it's I don't know. I kind of doubt that people will know what Flow is in like 20, 30 years time. But hopefully I'm wrong on that. It's a decent flick. I haven't seen many, but I like a film that's dialogue free, but not sound free. So I'm not talking old silent movies, which of course can be great, but films made in the sound era that just make the sort of creative decision to not have dialogue. Now, I really like that. And I've always kind of wanted to make a film that was like that as well, where sound was a huge part of the experience, but they just decided to not have dialogue. I mean, this film, you could say, does have dialogue in the sense that the animals are always yapping away, and they're talking, and you're supposed to infer what they're saying, but it doesn't have dialogue that we can understand. And I mean, there's a couple of good things about that. One is just like it's an interesting filmmaking challenge. But two, I'm in Spain here now, and I didn't have to find a cinema that would be showing films in original version, as they call it here, meaning not dubbed into Spanish. So that was nice, taking Tori along to the cinema with a whole bunch of like Spanish kids. I mean, she speaks Spanish as well, but just getting it's a nice way for people to commune, I think. Like I watched it with my mother-in-law. Funnily enough, maybe 2 times ago that I was in Madrid, myself and my mother-in-law went to see a Charlie Chaplin movie in the cinema, which was another case of like, no one's reading subtitles, no one's having to understand a language that they're not great at. We're just both watching the film as is, like in its sort of standard version, and we can both understand it, which is really nice. I guess there's not many times where you find yourself, most people don't generally find themselves watching movies with people who they have a language barrier with, but these rare films, increasingly rare films that facilitate that, are like very welcome. Anyway, yeah, the movie is a cute little film. I don't think it's a masterpiece or anything. I watch a lot of animated films. Every April, I watch an animated film every day. And then outside of April, I watch a fair few animated films. So I would say I watch more or less every significant animated film. Obviously, I can't keep up with every animated film that comes out. There's thousands of them, but in terms of ones that like get a bit of buzz in terms of like critical or commercial success, I generally watch them, no matter where they're from in the world, except for Japan, maybe, because that's just too much to keep up with. If I was trying to watch every Japanese animated film that got a degree of critical or commercial success, then I'd probably have to watch an animated film every single day of my life. But outside of Japan, I think keep up pretty well. So for me, Flow is like a really nice little film, but it's not like it's nothing too amazing. But there's a lot of cool stuff in it. I like that, or I find it interesting, I suppose, that like the animals really act like animals. They're not anthropomorphized at all. We see so many animated films starring animals, and generally speaking, they either physically are anthropomorphized, where they're like, I don't know, like Dogman that just came out in the cinema, where they're like stood up on their, they just like have human postures and animations, or they're like The Secret Life of Pets type animals, where they are still walking on all fours and stuff, but like their mannerisms and the way they talk and everything like that is completely human, and that's kind of part of the joke. And obviously, there's great movies in those camps, but this is really an attempt to look at what would it actually be like in this vaguely defined scenario if these I'll stop myself in my tracks right there, because they're not going for realism, but I don't think the filmmakers really believe that this is a realistic story, because it's not remotely. I think that the idea of multiple groups of animals kind of becoming seafaring little squads, whatever, is, I would say, unrealistic. I don't know. Is it unrealistic? You can see some crazy things, like where you see these things on the internet where it's like, this group of animals did this, and so I was like, oh right, I guess left to their own devices, maybe they could do something like this. But the film is also just not supposed to be that realistic anyway, I think, because it's the amount of times where something the cat is just about to die, but then some really unlikely thing sort of saves it. They're not going for realism, and that's at the very least fine, if not just good. I'm probably in favor of that, because it leads to it would be interesting to watch, because this is like halfway to realism. This is like halfway between A Bug's Life and then just like literally, let's try and work out what it would be like being, and that would be really boring. It would just be watching a cat just walk around not doing much and then drowning. So it feels like it's got a hell of a lot of realism by animated movie standards, or by movie standards, you could argue, but it is still a magical kind of story in a way. But that's interesting anyway, just exploring that and kind of seeing a film that's made from a different country, a different industry, I suppose, maybe just making different decisions than we've become accustomed to in these sort of tales of, a bunch of animals are in a pinch and they have to, like, against the odds, try and navigate a world that's not really designed for them. I've seen 1,000 movies like that. This one has a slightly different bent to it because of the realisticness in a way. So that's interesting. What else? I think just sort of atmospherically, the fact that the film feels much colder. It's not. It's quite a cozy film in many ways, but just the relationship between the characters is quite callous compared to what you would get in a Western. Well, this is made in the West, but in a American film like this, they'd hate each other, then they'd love each other. It was a classic arc that we see in Hollywood movies. And this one, cats are just really independent, and they do come to like if you have a cat and a dog, the cat and the dog will like each other, but the cat will always be like, I'm my own person. And I think this film does a good job of capturing the fact that like most of the animals, other than the dog, are not like just head over heels in love with the other animals in the movie. They have to work together, and they do work together, and they do like help each other and save each other, especially at the end of the movie. That's when we get like the most we're ever going to get into this like animals caring about each other kind of thing, with the saving of the beaver. If it was a beaver, could never fully work that out. But I like that it's just that bit colder. I've never been to Latvia, but I've seen movies from that part of the world, certainly Finland, and I think I've seen some Estonian films, and I've met plenty of people from the Baltic states, and obviously I've seen a lot of like Russian culture and stuff. So, you know, I'm not saying I have any expertise whatsoever in those cultures and relationships and stuff like that, but wouldn't surprise me to find that there's just things are a little bit more colder. It's hard to say this without making it sound like really critical. I don't actually mean it in a negative way at all. I just think that it's like if you go to the south of Spain, people, you know, you've just met someone, ask them for directions, they're throwing their arm around your shoulders. Like, maybe it's not like that there, which is fine. Certainly not like that in the Netherlands, which I know quite well. So I just think, yeah, it feels like a culturally different film from a relationship perspective than a lot of these like group of animals bond together type movies. Like on the boat, they were like, I'm doing my thing, you're doing your thing, kind of pissed off at you. Like, I like that. Well, I like the vaguely defined post-apocalyptic scenario that we find ourselves in. I think one concern I had when I saw the trailer for this film probably a year ago or so was like, this is just going to be banging me over the head with environmentalist rhetoric and propaganda, and I'm, you know, that would be preaching to the choir. I'm not saying I'm like you know, a climate change denier or something like that, but I just don't want to sit for an hour and a half watching a film, sort of like a fiction film, a story, a animated animals film, trying to convince me of something, especially if I already think that thing. It just feels like wasted time. So I like that they kept it very vague. It's like, look, what's happening in this movie is not to be taken literally, necessarily. It feels very heightened and, I would say, deliberately vague. But it's also like, if you're thinking about the fact that the world is changing, like observably the world is changing, and the physical nature of the world, like on a climate level and stuff like that, on water levels and all that, is clearly changing, I'm the last person to know like where specifically things are heading. But if you're just sort of just generally thinking about the fact that like there are trajectories that would potentially render the world uninhabitable for humans, and just on a landscape level very different, then I think making a film about characters traversing nature, traversing a landscape, is a great place to just kind of go a bit sort of surreal, sort of like, you know, like some would say this is a science fiction film. Other people would say this is a science fact film that's set in the future. It's all very, unless I miss something when I took my daughter to the toilet, they don't sort of hang their hat on any specific thing. I don't think it's ever even really revealed where the film is set, or I don't even know if the film is set anywhere in particular. Kind of got the impression that the film was sort of deliberately including design motifs from disparate part of the worlds to make it, to kind of like not have to say it's set in one particular place or even in our world necessarily. Although I think it kind of clearly seems to be our world. But yeah, it's very much like a picture book. Like, you know, I read picture books to my daughter every night, and they really don't have to answer to any kind of logic. They can just sort of do whatever they want artistically. And this feels like it's more in that spirit than anything else. So that's cool. Personally, I like that. I like when a film is like, we're gonna dream up another world. It's gonna have some elements of like hard sci-fi where it's like, you can really look at this as like a genuine thing, and then it's gonna have some elements of just magical, like, you don't need to take this too literally. I think those can be married together quite well. Early in the film, I thought it was all going to be one continuous shot, and I thought that was why it's called flow, but it doesn't seem to be. I wasn't concentrating too hard, but I think it does. It starts out quite like long continuous shots. I think a lot of it is long continuous shots, but I think it also cuts quite often as well. I was sort of telling my daughter what was going on because I was worried after the Moana 2 experience that she would be not hooked in on the movie. And I was like, everything that it's saying, I was like, oh, he's angry because she did this or whatever. Not that I was sure that she wouldn't get it, because it is, it's not a hard movie to understand, but she's only 3, and I just kind of wanted to make sure that she had the hook of the story. So that probably corrupted my viewing a bit in terms of like just a pure trying to interpret how successfully the film manages to always make it clear what's going on without any dialogue. But that said, I think the film like nails it in that regard. I actually don't think, from memory, as I said, it was a bit corrupted from the fact that I was like kind of like explaining it as I was going. So I didn't have a litmus test of like how well a 3-year-old could understand it, but 3 is super young. So it might be the case that the film plays better to like 5-year-olds or 6-year-olds or something like that. But yeah, I think they did a good job without resorting to like cartooniness. They did a good job of showing what characters wanted, how they differ, disagreements between them, all that kind of stuff. In the Richard Attenborough, is it Richard or David? I always get mixed up. I think it's David Attenborough nature documentaries. I always like when you could kind of see interactions between animals, and it's like, oh man, all of the motivations and desires and conflicts and everything are so readable. So I think there's a lot that you can do there in a film like this with it telling a simple story, but that is, in every scene, every character in the movie is like feeling a particular way, concerned about this, happy about that, angry about this. Like, it's all non-stop character stuff happening in the film, and I think it's all very readable, so that's good. And obviously it's a beautiful film. I tend to prefer films that have more of a strong art style, or more of a heightened art style that's like quite specific. Like I would be more excited about like the recent Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movie that Seth Rogen produced, because that's going for a really specific look, whereas this is in the environments going close to photorealism with sort of like a painterly veneer on top of that, and the actual animals are a bit kind of like download an asset from an online store type of thing. There's not that much like, it doesn't really feel like they have spent ages trying to work out like interesting interpretations of these animals and stuff. So it's not really my bag aesthetically, but I have to admit it is a very pretty film. Like, it's very beautiful, but I think there's a huge emphasis on beauty, both in the music, the sound, like the sound effects, the water and wind and everything like that, and the general like framing of shots and stuff is just like quite a nice film. So a nice gentle little one for my daughter's first movie. Anyway, I think I was thinking as I watched it, or after I watched it, that it would be probably up your alley. I know you love a wilderness movie. You love movies set in nature. You love, I think it's a caveman movie used to always be on about, Quest for Fire, I think. But there's been a few movies over the years that seem to be like, this is before language, or the language is incidental, it doesn't matter, and it's more just, apocalypto. I feel like there was a recent Predator movie that was like that, although I haven't seen that, so I'm not sure. But it feels like it's sort of in your wheelhouse. I think you generally love movies that are about animals, or is it just the human animal relationship that you particularly like? But yeah, I thought you'd probably dig it. So let me know what you think. Yeah, loud trucks passing now all of a sudden. I think this would be an interesting studio now to see if they were able to do this. But if they were able to do this with such minuscule resources, now with a bit of a cash injection, we'll see what they do next.
Hey man, great to hear that you've finally picked or managed to get a full movie down in the cinema with your daughter. I know you've been trying to find the perfect long-lasting movie that you could say was her first. I feel like in a way this movie might be something that she would look back on, because I could just imagine a 3-year-old in the world of Disney and whatever the equivalent of Cartoon Network and Nickelodeon is now, but that this animation might be quite striking to a 3-year-old, at least somewhere in the memory of their mind in the future. It's almost got that retroscope. Is that what it's called? That retrograde? I can't remember what it's called, but Richard Linklater did a few movies like it. Scanner Darkly, and another one that I can't remember the name of right now, but I know you know what I'm talking about. Kind of has that feel of it to an extent, and I know you mentioned that it uses the animated software Blender. I'm not familiar with that type of thing, and I know he's done another movie before this called Away, and that was done with an animation software called Maya. So yeah, you're probably a lot more familiar with those type of things than me, but I could imagine the animation being quite striking to a kid. This movie has definitely been on my radar. You are absolutely correct in your depiction of movies that I like. A Quest for Fire, yep, that's one. Apocalypto, Wendy and Lucy, these type of movies that depict experiences between humans and non-speaking animals, although I am partial from time to time for a speaking animal relationship as well with a human. So it is completely in my wheelhouse, and it is very interesting seeing movies where there's no dialogue but sound, as you put it, and there is a type of language and there is a type of communication. There's this movie I seen once recently called The Iceman, not to be confused with the Michael Shannon Hitman movie, but it's a movie set in Europe a few thousand years ago, and you're following these Stone Age characters, and there's no subtitles, but they are speaking a language, a very primitive language, and you are almost having an anthropological experience, minus the David Attenborough narration. Yeah, and for the record, David Attenborough documentaries, Richard Attenborough dinosaurs. That's the best way that you'll remember it. So I felt like Flo had that same type of feeling that I got in the Ice Age movie, The Iceman. Flo managed to do that with animals, and as I often mention, I've got 2 cats, and there's one of my cats at the moment, Mika, has a UTI, and I'm actually staying up for an hour and a half to give her a medicine now at 12:30. So I'm very much down with the cat community, and obviously I've been very worried about her recently and not getting much sleep. It's cost me a lot of money with the vet bills. So in a way, as you often mention, when there's a kid in a movie that now that you have a daughter, you gravitate towards a bit more and you feel a bit protective. Well, I couldn't be more protective of this cat in this movie going into this under normal circumstances, but especially what was happening with my own cat. I'm not down to see cat suffering of any kind, so I do understand what you mean about there's a different type of affection than maybe what we're used to in Ireland, maybe what we're used to in Spain or you were in this movie. It's almost like when you watch a Japanese movie and there's certain customs, certain mythology, certain stories that you could imagine if somebody's watching who is Japanese, that it's as common as the salmon of knowledge to us. But anyone that doesn't know the salmon of knowledge, who's maybe watching an Irish animation and someone's cooking some salmon and they lick their thumb and then become really knowledgeable, it would be very hard to find a way into that mythology as an outsider. And maybe there's some Latvian mythology that we're not aware of that would be part of this as well, that's thrown into the mix. But anyway, yeah, so really cared for this cat, who I presumed was called Flo, but that is a presumption because the flow could very well have a lot to do with the river itself and the water of this movie. But for whatever reason, in my head, I was referring to this cat as Flo. And I think, as much as you said the animation isn't your cup of tea, I will say the characteristics, the movements, and the mannerism of this cat was fantastic. The way they created this little story from the very beginning of this cat's routine. We see it waking up at this house with all these cat sculptures, and we can only imagine that perhaps, even though it's unlikely given the time span and the decrepitness of the world minus humans, you just imagine maybe a human had cats here and was very reverent for them, and this is the lineage of that. Maybe how many 100 years, maybe that's why there's a cat in this area. And we see the cat going down to the river trying to catch some fish and going back again to sleep on the bed and the top of the house. So there's very fantastic world building in this movie, and a fantastic capturing of how felines move, how felines act, how felines interact with themselves, how felines interact with the world. I would almost bet my life savings that this director Gents Zilbaladis, if that is the pronunciation, I would almost bet that he has a cat himself, because it's just so well observed. It could only be realized from somebody who's up close with a cat in that way. Now, I might be completely wrong about that, but it's just a strong feeling, and it is fantastic to see a feline perspective of a world that, like you mentioned, is post-apocalyptic, and there's obviously lots of different interpretations of that. What does it mean? How did it happen? It's hard to know how interested the film is in that, or how much we're missing from our unfamiliarity with Latvian culture. But it doesn't matter. And before we know it, we're on this very nice adventure with this dog, with this, I think you said it's a beaver. I think it's a capybara. Is that what it's called? And then there's a lemur as well. And the sound design of these characters is really important, and it's crucial to their friendship, if you can call it that, and you certainly can by the end of it. But I found this movie very refreshing in some way, and partly because of the post-apocalyptic backdrop, it made me almost feel like the world is going to be all right by removing the humans from this type of setting. There's something wholesome, there's something kind of pure, there's something akin to Terrence Malick and nature almost at times in this movie that I found very relaxing in a way. And you can imagine this exact same setting and this exact same world with humans in it. It could very well be The Road, you know? It could very well be The Walking Dead minus the zombies. But there's just something pure that only comes from animals in a way. And I'm not saying that animals don't do heinous things, but there's almost a kind of honesty with a lot of things animals do, even if they are as bad as some of the things we do. But it's almost of an ecosystem. And as Mr. Smith says in The Matrix, the way there's only one thing that destroys this environment, and that's a virus, and human beings do that. But without getting too deep, it's just very nice to see these characters almost on a Huck Finn adventure down this river and ocean, and almost not concerned with the wider picture that the world has ended. It's almost like only human beings would be concerned that the world has ended. Because these animals are very much concerned with their own individual needs, and those needs haven't changed very much, you could say. They still need to eat, they still want to play, they still want to sleep, they still want to not get washed away in the flood, not die. Very, very basic, almost commendably pure, innocent needs. And obviously we get them on the boat, and this is almost a Life of Pi journey minus the horrible undertone. This is the nice version of this, and I really like the interaction between the various animals on the boat. I really like the friendship. I really like how this was all articulated without talking. Like you said, you can imagine the cat in a Pixar movie, which I probably would have loved the Pixar version of this movie as well. I'm just saying that this is something different. You can imagine the cat being self-sufficient. I don't need nobody, and then gets stuck on a boat with this capybara, and then almost like an odd couple. But in this, they almost coexist in the same space despite themselves, and it's very mildly humorous to see them do different things, and there's a nice little, very subtle, not over the top comedy in this as well. The way that capybara smells, and the cat notices this, and then the lemur notices this, and then starts eating the flies around it. That's all very good as well, and we get to see the cat just going around being a cat on a boat, and that's enough for me. And then we get to see this lemur trying to collect shiny things. We see the capybara eating and sleeping, and they're all on this boat together, and it manages to do this in such a realistic way, even though it's totally unrealistic, that when some of the more fantastical things happen in this, at a certain point that I'm thinking, no, hold on, they wouldn't do that. And it does such a good job of capturing the characteristics of the animals, that when these things happen, like they steer a boat and a whale saves the cat, and all these different things, that I almost had to stop myself from saying, nah, come on, they've jumped the shark now. And I had to reframe myself for a minute, thinking, hold on a minute, this is an animation movie. This is poetic almost. It's allowed to have these elements without jumping any shark. But it's just a credit how they captured the spirit and the realistic sense of how animals interact, that it catches you off guard, the other elements, but it's absolutely fine. And there is a quest for fire flow to this movie, where these animals are kind of about their own needs, but by just spending time with the other animals, they kind of learn to care for each other. And like you said, oh, would that happen? Would these things happen? Probably not. But at the same time, I've heard crazy stories of animals left to their own devices all the time. It is far-fetched, but it's not that far-fetched. And in the world about humans, maybe it's not far-fetched. And a lot of this is open to interpretation. What happens as well, we get this great scene where this bird comes along and stands up for the cat, and there's this challenge, and then the bird's wing gets broken, and you're left to figure out the culture of those bird species and come up with your own reason as to why this bird has stepped in to help this surrogate family, what it kind of becomes. And my partner was watching it, and she thought, oh, is this a bit like Noah's Ark with the flood and the animals on the boat? Maybe. I have some theories myself later on. It's not fundamental to the movie. It's certainly hearsay and conjecture, and there's certainly far from anything to suggest a definitive interpretation of this. But at a certain point, I couldn't help think that maybe it wasn't as much that the humans had gone extinct or anything. It was more maybe an interstellar type of situation where they've left the planet, and then animals and nature reclaimed it, because we get that scene where that bird ascends into the cosmos, and there's this constant aurora borealis and things like that, and it did make me wonder, did human beings find like a wormhole to this other planet and leave things that they didn't think were of value behind? And then how would we be remembered in a planet where we're gone? And the architecture of the humans is fantastic in this world when it does appear mixed with the nature, and it does make you wonder what our legacy is. And again, this is just a sub thread to this movie. It certainly wasn't the main thing, and it's just more of a thought that I had, and my partner had a thought that, oh, this could be some Noah's Ark thing, and it doesn't amount to anything definitive. So yeah, I had a good time with this movie. It caught me at an emotional time with this protagonist, so I was a lot more invested than maybe you would be, maybe a lot more invested than I would normally be, even, probably not. But there is this great scene as well at the end where all of a sudden the flood almost reverses itself, which again made me wonder, was that something got to do with some technology? But again, that might have even been the case. Maybe it just might have been the cycle of the planet, as my partner suggested. But we get this great scene where they rescue the capybara on the boat in the tree, and then we have this scene where the three of them or four of them stare into this puddle and look at their reflection, and my partner thought, oh, maybe they realized as much as the water was a threat to them, they needed the water, which is an interesting interpretation. My interpretation was more that they've come to a sense of self through this journey that they're only beginning to understand. I don't know, there's a lot of threads and a lot of thoughts thrown out through watching this movie, but overall it's a very fun, engaging tale of this journey down a river or an ocean, and it is very unique, it is very original, and it is fantastic that this movie won an Oscar.
Interesting hearing some of your thoughts there. Yeah, there's a lot more to this film than one might think. Kind of just sort of taking a cursory glance at it at the surface, and I will say that my viewing of it, as much as it was nice to go see it in the cinema, my viewing of it was a little bit removed, or I would imagine more removed from the film than your viewing, because I was kind of watching my daughter watching it, literally, but also kind of figuratively. Like I was like, as everything I was watching was like, okay, how is this tracking for her? Is this too scary? Is this intelligible? Checking in on her, giving her snacks, bringing her to the toilet, stuff like that. So I think some of the more allegorical readings or more niche theorizing that one might apply to this film about, like, what if it's, you mentioned like portal to another dimension, all this kind of stuff. I didn't get that deep with the film. There was hints of that for me. There was certainly the film inspires some curiosity in what's happened to this world and stuff like that. But yeah, I didn't really have the opportunity to go as deep on it as you have. But it's interesting hearing you kind of talk through that now, because I can kind of like go back and project that onto the film, and yeah, it definitely is a film that allows for quite varied readings But just to sort of like run through some of the stuff that you've mentioned there in your voice note, because I took some notes there as you were speaking. It's interesting you said that you're like, sensitive to cat suffering in the way that I'm sensitive to child suffering, or just like protective. I mean, there is so much cat suffering in this movie, and that was probably the biggest point of anxiety for me watching it, was just like, now we don't have a cat, but of course my daughter loves cats and like says hello to them every time we're in the street. She like stops to say hello to all the cats and everything. And this cat is really put through the ringer. I mean, and it's not a Pixar cat. Like it is a very realistic cat. As you mentioned, it's very well observed, all the little tiny mannerisms and stuff like that. I grew up with cats personally. I've lived, a ever shrinking percentage of my life with cats, but still, the first 20 years of my life, I guess, or whatever, was with cats. So I know them well. And this cat, yeah, it drowns multiple times, I feel like. It's terrified many times. Yeah, it's just like there is a lot of anxiety here for someone who cares about animals, as I do, because the movie doesn't shy away from showing very realistic depictions of suffering and like peril for these animals. But yeah, for you, if you've got like a heightened version of that, both in a general sense and also in now immediately with what your cat's going through, then I can imagine this being quite a gut-wrenching movie. You mentioned though, I said that the animation isn't my cup of tea. If I did say that, I misspoke. What I meant to say is that the art style is not like the general art direction. That's not my cup of tea. Like that aesthetic that it has, which it looks very kind of sort of a stock assety, just the most obvious depiction of everything, but then with this sort of slight watercolor filter on top. The actual animation itself, I had no problem with, and because they're going for something realistic, I think they did a really good job with it. Now, I might have other animation styles that I prefer, but I think if you're going for something really realistic, then I think they did a good job with it. So yeah, in that regard, I liked it. I think something that we've both talked about a fair bit in our like digesting of this film is the ways in which it's realistic, the ways in which it's unrealistic. And I think that's an interesting lens to look at this film through. Every film, you could argue, from the most realistic documentary film in the world to something that just barely has a shred of realism. It's just all like surreal colors and it's a complete arty sort of thing. Like you could say that every film is on a spectrum of containing realism and surrealism or unrealisticness or whatever. And I don't know if I've seen an animated film that's like positioned right here, or even a film, maybe, I don't know, but where it's going for, it's like if you look at Ratatouille or any of these Pixar films that are about animals, or not just Pixar, just any animated film about animals, like Ratatouille, for example, has loads of quite realistic animal postures and scale and things like that, but it's obviously going for a very cartoony anthropomorphized rendition of the animals. This is going for something way more realistic, but it's also like constantly unrealistic in many ways. But just exactly where it's positioned on that spectrum, I think, is very unique. And that's one nice thing about this film. It's like you can't get this film from any other film. And I don't mean that as some like massive compliment, but just for whatever it's worth, this is a unique film, which I'll always appreciate. I'll always like to check in with a film and be like, oh, I've never seen this before. This is, first one. And yeah, thanks for the clarification on the capybara thing. Now that you say that, I'm like, oh yeah, okay, cool, capybara. But I barely know what a capybara is. I think, if you'd asked me to name what that animal is and given me like 10 choices, I probably wouldn't have come up with capybara. Beaver was what was in my head, but I was the whole time I was watching, I was like, I think it's a beaver, but it's not quite. It doesn't quite feel right, but whatever. So now you've confirmed. Now that you say capybara, I can picture. Oh yeah, I've seen like illustrations of them and stuff like that, but I actually don't really know much about them. Are they Australian, or what's the story with them? I like you said about like the way this film is. It has a sort of slight optimism of a post-human world. Like I've often thought that we're destroying the planet, everyone says, and we're just we're inventing renewable energies and stuff like that, but we're also like increasingly indulging in more and more energy usage and waste generation and stuff like that. And like I am no scientist, and like nothing I say about global warming or climate change or the environment or science or anything should ever be taken with anything other than like the world's entire supply of salt. But I have always thought, like, surely the planet will be okay. It's just that humans will go. I mean, humans have only been here for like a blink of an eye, less than a blink of an eye. It's just in terms of the life cycle of the planet, you might as well have not appeared. It's such a brief occurrence on planet Earth. And, we will, if we either bring about our own demise or some other event that's got nothing to do with us, like a meteorite or something brings about our demise, the planet will continue. And you don't see many films, or do you really see any films? I guess WALL-E is another one, that are set on planet Earth in an era where humans aren't on planet Earth. I suppose The Land Before Time and all that, but in terms of post-human planet Earth, films are few and far between. And there is something a bit calm and a bit like, okay, this is a dangerous environment that's like, full of mortal peril, but there's only so bad things can get because, as you said, the main virus is gone. So that's interesting, and there is something that's kind of calm about this film, where like there's never going to be a horn honking or anything like that. It is just down to nature, and we're just following. I mean, obviously humans are part of nature, but I mean, that's an interesting quality to this film that, again, is another thing that makes it different to other films. And the stuff you were saying at the end there about like your partner's interpretation or not, I don't know if that was like an exact interpretation or just like a interesting thought that came to mind of the Noah's Ark reference. And you mentioned the wormhole thing. I actually went to the toilet, or brought my daughter to the toilet around the time of that wormhole bit, and came back just as it was happening. And so I might have even missed some context that would kind of push me in one direction of a specific interpretation or another. But there's a lot that you could read into this. You mentioned that we aren't familiar with Latvian mythology, so if there's any of that in there, then that's lost on us. I'll say for my part, I watched this film completely on a surface level. Like, I watched it as like, what this film is about these animals running away from, they're trying to escape this flood, and then the water goes away, and everyone is happily ever after, except for the bird, right? That I couldn't have watched it on. I watched it on a 3-year-old level, I would say, with a 3-year-old and vicariously through a 3-year-old, and that's just how I watched it. If there's anything else in the film that's intended as an interpretation, so not just like look, we've left room for you to bring your own interpretations to the table and make it fit what you will. But if there's something that's like pointedly supposed to be a takeaway of the film, I didn't get that. It's fascinating to me. It's really interesting. And I definitely thought to myself, is this film about more than I am getting from it? The fact that the water comes on so instantly, of course that could happen if a levee broke, right? It could theoretically, a rising tide in certain areas in the world could result in like an instant, like flash flooding or whatever. But, you know, generally you'd imagine like a kind of post-apocalyptic rising tide sort of thing to be an incredibly slow incremental process, like taking lifetimes. But, you know, if you take that as you sort of accept that as like, if you go, well, for some reason the water came in quick, but the fact that it then goes away at the end, that those two things combined, and I guess the fact that it's going supernaturally fast, like, you know, she climbs to the top of this giant cat statue and then it's just like instantly up, you know, fully submerging it. All of these things together make me go, well, the film decided to present events or a scenario that should not be taken literally, is more similar to the stories that we would get within a religion or within a cultural tradition than events that happen in our world. And so then that makes me go, well, then is usually when you see that kind of stuff, whether it's Aesop's fables or the Bible or wherever it might be, the point is to say something, right? To pass some wisdom or some point on to the receiver of the story. So not that I had any specific interpretation, but I definitely came away from the film going, I wonder, like, I'm curious to learn more about the background, or like the kind of what ideas were in the heads of the writers when they were kind of like constructing this vision. Now, saying that, I also like the relationship I have with the film now, and obviously it's a film that will always have a bit of an important place in my heart because it's the first film that I ever took my daughter to. She's obviously seen loads of films at home, but in terms of the cinema, like, that is the first one. And I don't know, I kind of like the vibe of, like, it's one of these things where sometimes when you explain something away, and I don't know if this is possible to do with this film, but let's say it is, sometimes when you explain something away and you go read online, it's like, oh, well, the director has actually confirmed that this means this and this because of this. Then it's like, oh, you've kind of taken away a special quality that the film has. I think this is why David Lynch has like always refused to answer any questions, like clarify anything about any of his films. And like, it's not, the point is not necessarily understanding it fully or reducing it down to just like a very straightforward series of events or singular philosophical point or whatever. And I don't know what the director would say, but for me as an audience member, I think I like this sort of slightly untouchable quality that this film has, especially when you compare it to other children's animated films. Like, you know, we keep going back to Pixar, but, you know, it could be anything. It could be like the, you know, Migration that came out last year, I think, was the Illumination one. We've got so many movies that are ostensibly similar to this. They're about like a group of animals on an adventure. And I can't really think of any other ones that even something like the Plague Dogs or something that's like, you know, very smart and intellectually gratifying and all that kind of stuff, but still I can't think of any other ones that are as sort of untouchable in terms of like exactly what's happening in the movie as this. Well, I say that is gone midnight now, so of course I'm not going to be able to think of any other one. There probably are other examples, but yeah, it's a unique little film, and it's a good little film, and I'm glad that you enjoyed it as well. So yeah, I guess let's see what this director does next. You've mentioned that he's already done another film prior to this. I wasn't aware of that, so I'll have to check that out. See, is it a short or is it a full feature? Yeah, curious to see what he does next.
Bear with me if I sound a bit delirious or whatever, not making sense. I've got a cold, so aka a flu and dying. I can't believe that I mention my cats every other minute and probably multiple times on the show because they often attack me while I'm recording these voice notes. And this is the first time in our friendship I found out you've lived with these magnificent, majestic creatures for 20 years. The more you know. Yeah, just a capybara fact there, as I am now flying the symbol for these great creatures. They are actually rodents from South America, often hunted for their meat. And they actually are the symbol for a working class struggle and communism in South America in some places. So pretty cool capybara facts there. That's all I got. And to be clear, you're talking about your relationship in relation to this film. In terms of you're just watching people on an adventure. And then that's your relationship with the film. To be clear, that's my relationship with the film as well, for the most part. Like 90% or 80% of my enjoyment and my viewing lens was I'm watching these animals on an adventure, and everything else was just almost bonus content that never really fully got articulated into a viewpoint. But it is very nice that there is these other layers and visual moments in this movie that are on top of that, because at the heart of this movie is just an amazingly fun adventure from the point of view of these animals, and we're almost watching it like a complete outsider from the culture of what's going on with these characters, and that's pretty unique, as you mentioned. And I think the other thing to be said for this movie, and it might sound insane, but because it's animated, I can't really state enough how good of a physical performance this is from the cat and these other various characters. And maybe if you turn down mute to some of these Pixar movies, you get some of those depictions as well. I don't know. I don't think so, because like you said, they anthropomorphize the animals in Pixar often. In this, because we're left with no dialogue, and obviously there is sounds, but we're almost watching this Charlie Chaplin-esque cat that's such a physical performance in everything it does. It's like watching Mr. Bean at times, or Buster Keaton. There's this communication through body language and movement of especially the cat adds so much to the comedy in this movie, adds so much to the scenes. There's a scene early on when the cat is walking with a strut, thinking it's better than I think it's the capiera, I can't remember now, but just there's this strut of smugness that cats do. And then there's a scene later on where it's scared and kind of hiding and just doing all these things that cats do, but they manage to put cat mannerisms into a performance that just works so well and adds so much to every scene in this movie, whether it's played for laughs, played for sorrow, played for tension. Like you mentioned, the scenes when the cat is drowning, all that is pure physical acting, and obviously it's pure physical animation. Someone drew this, and I've just never seen such a realization of that type of performance that's very grounded in something real, like real mannerisms and whatnot. Like we've certainly got some of those performances in animation that were grounded in human-like animations, but to take it on their terms was really good, and it allows us to see the world through the character's eyes, even if it's a world that we don't fully understand. Like there's a scene where we see all these birds and they're with their babies, and they come across it, and then there's a showdown between these two birds, and one of the birds' wings gets broken, and we have an idea why that's happening, but we don't fully know the culture of the species and the birds. It's like you're not walking in the air with all the snowmen and stuff. You don't fully know what's going on, but you've got enough of context to kind of make a guess, but also feel like a complete outsider. And in this, we do feel like an outsider, but at the same time, because it's very easy to know what a cat's like, especially if you've got cats or been around them or even just observed them at the level that your daughter has. And that's fantastic. So yeah, I think he's done a feature-length film before this. Something that I'd definitely be interested in exploring. Obviously, it didn't get the hype, but that doesn't mean that it's not necessarily a very good movie. And I know you do Animated April, so maybe add that for one of those years, and I'd certainly get on that with you. But yeah, good movie.
Your mailbox is full. Please delete new or stored messages which you no longer need so that new messages may be received.